The New World Order is seeking to bring into law stringent new global controls to dictate where people will live, what they can own, and how many resources they can consume. Its overarching mantra is a sustainable future by 2100, or Agenda 21, although an accelerated version running in parallel with Agenda 21, called Agenda 30, is also now being pushed into play. Its secondary platform is the elimination of wealth inequality in the world. This is a way in which everybody gets more or less the same things, and only the elite at the top own everything, in fact. So it's actually a form of world socialism. Agenda 21 has been underway since 1995, or for 23 years already, and is being driven by the United Nations and Earth Summit. It aims to achieve some of the population reduction goals set by the Georgia Guidestones and the social reforms sought by the New World Order. Now we're going to session 38, Agenda 21, Sustainable Future and Depopulation Plans. We're going to talk a bit about those today. We're going to start out by looking at a couple of short video clips, only about a minute or so each. So let's just have a quick look at those.
The Earth just cannot handle the sheer number of humans who live here. Something has to give. And I believe that it's up to us who have lived a good life to make sure that our children will have the opportunity to live good lives too. I have lived a good life.
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 For millions of years, this lake thrived. But now it is dying. Poisoned by humans who put themselves above nature. It's time to stop the killing. It's time to heal our planet. It's time to remove your footprint. Agenda 21 is coming soon.
Now the message is clear. You've had your good life, now move over. And let the government make a few changes to ensure others in the future have a good life like you. The truth, they believe, is that unless population is pulled downwards, good life cannot be promised to anyone. Wars will continue for dwindling resources. Mass depopulation is therefore one of its initial concerns, and in fact objectives. Later, there will be eugenics and state-imposed population control, which will also have to be used to keep things in their status quo. Let's have a look at another video, this time quite a bit longer, by Lyndon LaRouche, and he's looking at the topic Rapid Population Reduction Policy Implemented.
LaRouche, you could say, from a left-wing view, but now he's called a right-winger, and an extreme right-wing by the Washington Post. The truth is he's a populist, and you can learn so much. I mean, he kept saying, we're in danger from asteroids hitting the Earth. The last time he was on 6 months ago. Now look at what's been happening with all these asteroids, and saying we're going through this asteroid intergalactic belt, not just the smaller belt around us. Now they're admitting that's happening. So enough of an introduction. I want to get him on about the economy, all the things that are happening. But first off, sir, joining us via video Skype for TV viewers, for radio listeners, you can go to prisonplanet.tv and watch us right now. What is front and center on your radar screen right now, sir? I want to give you the floor for the next 7-8 minutes till we come back from break, and then I've got some questions of my own, but I want to cover the waterfront because you said we're going to enter this global crisis. And now North Korea, the Middle East, the dollar, the world bond market, where are we right now? What is most important in your view right now, sir?
The most important thing right now is the danger of some nuclear war. And as long as we have this president in position, we are at great risk. Now, in these matters of this kind of warfare, you can't really predict, because you don't know whether you're going to get thermonuclear war, which means general human extinction, or we're not. In the meantime, we have a process going on, like other processes, which are important because they are turning points or potential turning points in the situation. For example, we have the agreement by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who are now going to meet with Russians on the question of dealing with things like asteroids and other threats that are now becoming much more prevalent. We also have the need to build up systems to defend us against things that are flying around in nearby space. So we have a situation in which we can identify things that should be discussed and decided, but we have no certainty that any of these things will be the outcome. This is a real war type situation, broader than just warfare itself, in which the questions are more clear than the answers. And that's the way I think we have to keep it. We cannot give you guaranteed answers. We can say what the answers are to certain questions, posed the right way, just like this negotiation is going on with Russia and our Joint Chiefs of Staff now. We don't know what the outcome is, but we do understand the problem. And that's the way it is down the line. But the key thing that is certain, if this president remains in office, the United States is finished.
What are the power structures? What are the factions from your deep connections, Mr. LaRouche, right now, in layman's terms for the audience? Boil it down so we understand the parties involved and what we, the people in the middle, can do to tip the balance towards a less violent outcome.
Well, the first thing we have to think about is we have to think about the United States, not because it is our United States as such, but because the creation of the United States, following what Christopher Columbus did, we had attempts to open up the Atlantic Ocean and to move out from Europe to new options in the other side of the Atlantic. Everything broke down eventually, and suddenly it was our Massachusetts development and things like that, which set the tone for what would be the new replacement for the problems of Europe. So our United States, as corrupted as it has become, nonetheless represents the one major force on which the hope of the world actually depends. There are other nations which will cooperate with us, some certainly, others hopefully. But that's our situation.
So you're saying the world's future really does rise and fall on recapturing the republic that has been the laboratory of true renaissance in the last 300 years?
Absolutely. If you look at the situation in the transatlantic region and elsewhere, there are many nations which have capabilities. Europe has generally lost its capabilities in the recent decades. We in the United States, we have been partly destroyed, especially since the young Bush administration and this current Obama administration. Those forces have almost destroyed the United States. But there is reason to be optimistic. I can't predict the victory, but I can tell you what I'm optimistic about. And I see what happened after the indoctrination and installation of Obama the second round, that I see things in our people, movements among our people, in groups of people, which are, for me, are very optimistic things. When the American people awaken from a long period of quasi-sleep or despair and so forth, and as you see in the political system now, a gradual moving in a new direction, searching for a new direction. And you see it in the members of Congress. You see it in the divisions that are occurring among Republicans. Republicans are no longer fully agreed with each other on most positions. And Democrats, we don't know quite where they are, but we have ideas of where some people would like to go. So we're in a position of potential change.
I agree, but let's look at the geopolitical layout, because you've been putting out some of your video press releases that are particularly powerful when you break down all the factions. What are the Anglo-American British imperialists trying to do right now? What is their game plan around the world? Because they do seem to be particularly agitated right now.
Well, if you look at the history of the United States since the installation of Andrew Jackson, who really was nothing except a big noise, there were other people who were British directed. British banking terms actually took over the Andrew Jackson administration. And so these are the kinds of things in history we have to look at. But our United States recently has begun to realize how bad the current two presidents, young Bush and Obama, are, and they want to change. And we have I think that's an option for it. There are bigger things than that on the horizon.
Well, I want to cover what you think is most important and what's happening in the banking structure, how bad the global financial meltdown is, because, again, you called it when they got rid of Glass-Steagall back in the late 90s. And so I want to come back from break and ask you, what you think, well, briefly, what's happening with Cyprus and the grabbing of that money? Are they trying to cause a panic?
Well, that kind of thing is going on. The general situation is we are at the verge, especially in the transatlantic region. We are on the verge of a general breakdown crisis, which can come on suddenly. We are already in a breakdown crisis. It has not disintegrated yet, but it's on the verge of disintegration.
Leonard LaRouche is our guest. We'll give you his websites when we come back. But the most important thing is I want you to define breakdown crisis, define triggers for thermonuclear war, and why you've been saying the last year we're entering the greatest danger zone of that in modern history, which is now manifesting. I want you to explain it to us all on the other side. This is important. Leonard LaRouche is our guest. I'm Alex Jones. Leonard LaRouche, what is a breakdown crisis? Why are you saying we're in the danger of a nuclear war? Why did you say that a year ago, and now we're seeing the sabers rattled and Russian fleets going to Cyprus and all of it? In fact, you even sent me a report, Cyprus, Glass-Steagall. So break that down for us.
Well, without Glass-Steagall, the United States economy is finished. We're already in a hyperinflationary explosion. And unless we can cancel most of the banks, which are not Glass-Steagall banks, or don't conform to what Glass-Steagall banks would mean, this nation is finished. And it can be finished on any day or any week in the near future. I've been pushing for Glass-Steagall as absolutely necessary. We also need something in addition to Glass-Steagall. We need the actual reestablishment of a credit system for the United States. That is, where the federal government will create a pool of lendable currencies on approval for projects which are deemed responsible. We need those things. For example, we have a number of large projects for the United States. We've been losing everything. You take the central states of the United States, they've been destroyed over the past years. The worst things have happened since, again, Bush came in, young Bush came in, and Obama, and we've really destroyed the food-producing section of the United States. We no longer have the ability to guarantee a food supply for the people of the United States. That is something which we have to deal with.
Why do the globalists, why do the eugenicists always obsess on making people dependent? I know the answer, because that's the name of the game, total control, but expanding on this, when you talk about we could be finished any day financially, here's a headline at Infowars.com, breaking, only covered by a local ABC News channel. Chase customers see bank account balance reduced to zero. Glitch stokes panic on Twitter. Now that was just a glitch, but describe what you're saying, sir, could happen overnight. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, what was done in terms of the hyperinflation done, which has gone on, we are absolutely bankrupt, and it's the banks, the big banks, which are the problem. You have to put this thing through bankruptcy reorganization now as a preventive measures to enable us to start a program of economic growth. Without a radical change in economic growth, without the end to this so-called green policy, the United States is doomed. The green policy is the greatest enemy inside the United States. It's also the enemy launched by Britain. Europe is full of it. So the very fact we are not producing the amount of food required to maintain our population.
And look at how Greece and Spain have adopted it, and they admit it's wrecked them. And China can build 3 new plants a week. We can't even have 1 a year. For those that don't know, explain to them, sir, what the so-called green movement really is.
Well, the idea, very clear. In the Denmark attempt to establish a world tyranny of, on that basis of the Queen's idea, they came out with this idea of actually genocide, or the Queen's policy, and it's not just her personal policy, it's the policy of the British Empire, is to reduce the world's population from the present estimated level of 7 billion persons to the order of 1.2 billion people. That is the policy, and if you look around you, you look in Europe, you know that is the policy in practice. It was under this influence that we shut down the food production in the Central Plains area. We do not presently produce enough food to take care of the entire U.S. population. We are on a policy of reduction of population. And when you talk about that, what the Queen has insisted upon, and all of the people associated with her on this, is to reduce the human population rapidly now from 7 billion people level to 1.2. So there are several things to consider. First of all, there is people are frightened. They're disgusted as well as frightened. And that's a fact. But that doesn't give you the answer. That does not give you the solution. More people are upset by these conditions. But that being upset does not solve the problem. You have to have measures which are concrete. You have to mobilize people around such measures. You have to make the changes in policy, especially in economic policy, which are essential to save this nation from extinction. And not only our nation, but our nation has a very significant role that most Americans no longer recognize. Because we are a special creation. We have a history, one could go into that, but the point is we were destroyed and corrupted from within. Many of our presidents have been corrupting agents. Some other presidents have saved us. But the United States has an inherent role in the history of mankind, in the entire history of mankind, which is absolutely unique. And it's something that started essentially with Columbus's travels across the Atlantic as a discoverer. It came into Massachusetts. Massachusetts was crushed. Then Massachusetts people like Benjamin Franklin fought back and created a new kind of nation which had never existed to man's knowledge before. Now, we still have, through the way we handle immigration, we took people who were poor from all over the world. We brought them into the United States. They went through successive generations of rising in terms of their condition, their culture, and so forth. We in the United States are actually the pivot of the possibility of maintaining this planet, really, as for us, and that sort of thing. But if we fail, if we drop the ball, if we no longer provide that kind of leadership, which was brought into Massachusetts, and is a part of this Columbus sequel, if we drop the ball, the world is doomed. They need us. And many parts of the world know they need us, or they need us in some respect. In China, there's a recognition in China today that the United States is needed. There's an acute sense of Russia. The United States is needed. You have people in Europe who are suffering, threatened by destruction of their whole nation. They need us. But
let's talk about the globalists that have hijacked America. You've talked about their exterminism, ultra-Hitlerian mindset, Hitler being one of their creations. But for many years, you've pointed out that the ruling class are insane. And I understand that they're very intelligent, have intelligent bureaucracies that know how to deceive. But knowing their mindset or their tropism, What is the real state of the world right now? I mean, quantify that, and then where it's going.
I think my experience and my knowledge of history, this is not merely a matter of how many people are bad or so forth. It's a question, do we have a part of our population which is able to contribute leadership, which, you know, most people were born in history, modern history and even ancient history, were born as poor people, poorly educated, downtrodden, oppressed. They didn't have good knowledge. And then once in a while, like with Shalaban, you had somebody comes up and creates a whole new system, then he dies, and very soon after that, what he had accomplished disintegrated. So the idea of the quality of leadership, of people who are dedicated and capable of understanding what leadership is.
That's why you see civilizations appear, grow, and then collapse of their own corruption. We definitely have that same brain rot, but now we have nuclear weapons. And we see all the armies lining up, and then we see the bankers looting people's private bank accounts when it's impossible to pay off the derivatives. What do they think they're going to do in the city of London? What do...
Well, you could say there's something satanic about the British monarchy, and you go back and if you know the history, and very few people do know the history because it's available for them, actually the British Empire is a product of the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire... The
Venetian black nobility. So explain their game plan. Exactly. Explain how the Queen runs things.
First of all, you had the Roman Empire disintegrated in large degree. The leading families of the Roman Empire went up the Adriatic and became Venetians. And the Venetians went through a crisis, and then you had a second Venetian. Then you had a Venetian called William of Orange. William of Orange invaded Britain, invaded and jolly committed genocide against the Irish, which is one of the sports of the British monarchy these days still. And therefore, what we got into this kind of situation. We now have still the legacy of the Roman Empire in particular, which is a strong force culturally in Europe, and is in terms of, for example, take the case of in some of our presidents, and we found what happened is the British banks moved in, taking over a presidency, moved in to the New York area and the Massachusetts area. The British bankers, British banking system, imperial banking system, took control of the United States up to the time of the Civil War. The Lincoln broke that off, but then the same thing came back again.
And this was in all our newspapers, and then in 22 with Proud House and the CFR. This was the public battle. I mean, what you're talking about was front page news for 100+ years. Nowadays, it's conspiracy theory. Just like if you told an ancient that the moon, you know, really wasn't a man, that it was a rock satellite, they would think you were a conspiracy theorist. The level of ignorance, but you're saying you're seeing a rediscovery of this.
Yeah, that's what we are seeing in the population now. They're disgusted. The hatred against Obama, mixed with the fear of Obama, is what is defining. Also, what's happening, the political parties, which thought they were solid, Republican and Democrat, are no longer that. They say still exist in terms of name, but if you look at the inside of the discussions...
Same people.
Yeah.
So they're putting out a hoax that he's been endorsed, that he's loved, but all the real evidence shows total collapse of confidence. I hear our police chief on local radio saying there's been a collapse in confidence. You know, I'm not bad. I'm not with the bad guys. And I hear other police chiefs and people talking like that. And I hear other mainline hosts admitting across the board, we've got tyranny. I agree with you that there is an epiphany beginning to happen right now. Let me ask you this question. The thousands of armored vehicles being deployed, the checkpoints, the 2 billion bullets, the urban warfare drills, the military admits they've been told to prepare for gun confiscation. That's in the Army manuals now. But then Obama's people stonewall and say there are no drones, there are no bullets. What is this domestic buildup for?
What you're talking about really a situation which is going toward thermonuclear war. So that the idea that there's some power more powerful than the issue of thermonuclear war is a piece of idiocy. The world is threatened by thermonuclear war. Now, a thermonuclear war is not just a war. It is not throwing missiles at something. This is a process which, if undertaken with the capabilities which now exist, that thermonuclear war launched within 1 hour, can result in the extinction of the human species.
Wow, so you're saying they're gearing up domestically because they're getting ready for nuclear war?
Not really. It goes together with that. But it's not a simple scheme.
How does the nuclear war start? On the Korean Peninsula or in Europe?
No, it starts from London. The British Empire. Look, if you look at what's happened in the British system recently, you see what happened, the unnecessary long Iraq War. Tony Blair did it. Tony Blair is the controller of the current president of the United States. He was the guy that put him in on behalf of the British Queen. We've been going toward hell. And we have the other side of the thing is, at the same time, we are faced with threats in the solar system, with threats of comets, which come into the solar system and can kill a lot of people if they ever hit the area.
Now, you said that last year on my show, and the media made fun of you about it, but now we're seeing record numbers of large asteroids coming in and blowing up. How did you know about that?
Well, that's my business, to know those kinds of things.
No, I understand. You. I mean, in fact, you were the guy, the presenter of the idea of a global really. Space defense system.
No, I started that in the sense that I was on my own at a certain point in the late 1970s in Europe. And when I began to push this process, I found people who've been veterans of the OSS, who were still leading survivors of the OSS, and others who agreed with me, and we came together, and I had some dealings with the Soviet system, and also they were going to collapse, and I told them so, and they knew it. And a large number of them were willing to come over and work with us on this whole problem.
That's right, because there were two CIA directors that said you were one of the best analysts alive. Which one was it that told Reagan that he should adopt your policies? I have to pull the Washington Post back up.
There were a lot of them. There were a number of people, but they were also leading people, generally came from the OSS background. You had people who were still leading people whose background was essentially OSS.
And you were on record saying the Soviets were going to collapse before other people were. Why did they respect you so much? What were you telling them?
I just told them what the truth was, and they knew the truth, but they had to have somebody tell them that. They knew that we almost had the SDI success at the time that Reagan was leading in that charge. We almost had it, but the British put in a new stooge Soviet leader who mobilized all his British cronies, and therefore, that we were turned down on that basis. But Reagan always...
Well, the media also turned it into a weapon system instead of a missile defense, but also asteroid defense, right?
The idea was we all knew, including key people in the Soviet system and related systems, we knew that the Soviet Union was doomed. Now, rather than going out with a big flaming nonsense, can't we come to an agreement on policies, international policies, which avoid this threat of general warfare and undertake cooperation among nations to deal with our problems? And
so you were a liaison behind the scenes on what led to perestroika, but they never got to that because their people got in. Who was Gorbachev?
Gorbachev was an evil fellow. He's still around, I think. But he was not. He was the second man in this operation. But this was, if you find the peculiar thing about the Soviet system, and in Russia today, there's still that kind of problem. Most of these guys were called the Marxists. The real Marxists were British operated, like Bertrand Russell's crowd. Bertrand Russell was one of the most significant penetrators of the Soviet system you ever saw, and continued to his
And he was really a eugenicist.
He was everything. He's a human being hater.
And the establishment in Europe, England, and the U.S. is behaving in their actions, not their rhetoric, like all Hades is about to break loose. And they're doing incredibly bold and criminal things, putting al-Qaeda in all over the Middle East, demonizing patriot groups in America, clearly getting ready for false flags. Lyndon LaRouche, I'll tell you what I see happening. I see them gearing up to stage terror events to blame on the American people. like Oklahoma City, to go after kind of libertarian populist, and also they're demonizing any type of progressive populist that they don't control. I see a real move towards authoritarianism by Obama with his left cover, his invasion of Africa under AFRICON. I mean, the globalists, it seems, are on the offense. Is that a form of defense, and what do they expect to get out of this, and how do we reverse them taking us on a path that you predicted will lead to thermonuclear war?
Now, this is a cult. The problem is a cult. The cult is that of the British monarchy. And if you look at the banking system, the key to this operation is you've got to go to the way the banking system was set up under Rome all the way through Britain. It is that international banking system which is the organizing center of all of these operations. The answer is, how do you influence people? You buy them. And you find that many of our, for example, senators and so forth that I know, they have been bought. That's why they do what they do. Why are we controlled? Under Jackson, for example, we were bought. The British bankers based in the New York region and in Boston set up the operation which really wrecked the United States for a long period of time. And it's always been, and it's the same thing today.
They also financed the Civil War. That's on record, but people don't know that.
Oh, sure. But the point is that's always been the case. It is British-controlled bankers. But they're not just British. What they do is they represent the legacy of the Roman Empire.
How do the Rothschilds tie in?
The Rothschilds are just instruments of this process. They were picked up as skillful people to play a role for the British monarchy.
Wow, and right now we're in the world breakdown that you predicted, and I've tried to get you to talk about it today, but you'll never talk about yourself in a past tense. But you have been screaming since the mid-'90s that they were going to create derivatives and do this, and now it's happening. How do we get out of that? Bring back Glass-Steagall? Glass-Steagall would work. If you take a measure of the United States population, I study it and look at it and deal with it. There is a movement right now. You'll find that the Democratic and Republican Party are no longer cohesive forces against each other. We are about to be freed from that kind of partisanship. What you have is you find people who are classified as New Left or whatever, all Republicans and so forth. They're all different because they have nothing that they can unite about as a united policy. And therefore, you saw that in the results of the recent election. And how is that a good thing? Now we can come into the vacuum with original constitutional ideas.
That's right. We don't need a Congress which is a majority feature. We need a system of government, which is our constitutional system, which is responsive to what our needs are.
Sir, finishing up with solutions here with you. I mean, Dick Cheney is so arrogant, and a globalist agent that he wrote in the PNAC document, September 20th, we should get the media to legitimize the use of race-specific bioweapons. And there wasn't even a media outcry. Our local paper wrote about it, the Austin American-Statesman. But that gives you a mindset into the exterminism, cult, death cult thing. I mean, you're not just saying that. That's who they are. And it transcends party. Obama is one of their great minions. So how do you counter such pure evil with logic? I guess you go to the people?
That's precisely when the people are ready to listen to you. And what we're in a stage now is if you look at as the result for the Democratic Party, the Tea Party and so forth, as a result of the last election campaign, you see that what came out of there was not a unified, system of congressional rule under a presidency. That is gone. The Republicans could not hold themselves together in the way they before, nor could the Democrats. The Democrats are still trying in the Senate to do that, but it's not going to work. The citizens, as we saw with the Rand Paul, the citizens are now acting on the basis of their own conscience. Not everyone, but a significant number, and the number is growing.
And as that happens, they're not going to be able to control the narrative anymore.
No, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the Constitution, in which the state constitution, the state government, rules the state, in which the states cooperate together as states. And they're not going to cooperate on the basis of partisanship as such. They're going to cooperate on the basis of what they think the interest of the nation is from the standpoint of their state. And once we get back to that, which is our original constitutional system, we can make it. We have a situation like right now with Russia and the United States. Our leading military command is now in the meeting with Russia on cooperating against the threat.
And that's what Hagel said. He said the military's rebelling against Obama, but I see them firing all these people because they won't launch wars.
Well, it's going to go in various directions. We're not going to end up with fighting wars. Because when you start talking about fighting wars, you're talking about the use of weapons systems which do not allow you to come out alive.
That's right.
In a war. So therefore, now the time has come that we're going to have to really realize the intention of our Constitution. We're going to stop trying to dictate things, trying to take power. We're going to cooperate with other nations, but as sovereign nations in their own right. We're going to cooperate. The greatest thing that threatens us today is a threat from in space, from asteroids, from comets, and so forth.
Well, that's right. We're always focusing on just the planet. What about the whole universe around us?
Mankind has reached the point that we are actually now going to establish the interplanet system, or part of the interplanet system, which is habitable and approachable. We are going to find ourselves running a certain part of the solar system, which is going to be the solar systems where man lives. Now, we're not going to go into Mars right away to live there as human beings, but we are in the process of two things. One, Mars is now an area in which mankind is going to build up systems and begin to work with that planet as a planet to deal with some of our problems. We're going to do the same thing in other cases. So we are now in a point where we're going to defend mankind in this section of the solar system.
Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published.
If you live in the heartland of America, you have to listen up. While the nation was distracted with the Anthony Weiner drama, President Obama signed an executive order that will seize greater power over food, fiber, and energy in our vast countryside area.
It was during that study in which I began to realize that this was not an effort to protect the environment, but an effort to control you and I.
The world is going more and more deeply into a general breakdown crisis, which would probably result in the elimination, within a generation or two, of 2/3 of the present level of the world's population.
The UN-funded Commission on Global Governance began meeting in 1992 in earnest and met for 4 years, and last fall released their final report. It is entitled Our Global Neighborhood. A few of the things that they wish to do: create a world-standing army under the day-to-day command of, who else? The UN Secretary General. They recommend the creation of a new Economic Security Council, into which the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations Development Program, and the World Trade Organization would all be consolidated. A unified worldwide banking scheme, currency. I have been challenged on the radio and in audiences like this, Mr. Lamb, there's no such thing as a global agenda. Hey, friend, you're absolutely wrong. Here it is. It's called Agenda 21.
If you live in the heartland of America, you have to listen up. While the nation was distracted with the Anthony Weiner drama, President Obama signed an executive order that will seize greater power over food, fiber, and energy in our vast countryside areas. The president created the White House Rural Council to, quote, make sure we're working across government to strengthen rural communities and promote economic growth. Sounds great, but get this. The council involves a long list of the most powerful people in America. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, the Defense Secretary's on it, Attorney General Eric Holder, even the head of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. Why would Homeland Security be involved in exerting power and influence over the heartland? Why would the Defense Department be involved in promoting economic growth? The plan calls for the federal government to control almost every aspect of rural America. It'll also, quote, identify and facilitate economic opportunities associated with energy development, outdoor recreation, and other conservation-related activities. Really? When did hunting and fishing become associated with conservation-related activities? And by the way, what does that mean? The aims of the White House Rural Development Plan sound eerily similar to a UN plan called Agenda 21, where a central planning agency would be responsible for oversight into all areas of our lives, a one world order. Sound familiar?
Agenda 21, the primary document presented in Rio de Janeiro and adopted by more than 100 heads of state, including George Bush, which lays out in intricate detail all of the transformation that must take place in society in order for it to become sustainable as they define sustainability. The Conference of the Parties held its first meeting in Nassau last December. At that first meeting, the United Nations Environment Program presented them with a global biodiversity assessment. Started in 1992 with a grant from the Global Environment Facility for $3.3 million, orchestrated and coordinated by the World Resources Institute and the World Wildlife Fund and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. This is 1,140 pages that explains how to implement the 16-page treaty on biodiversity. The last 200 pages, section 13, deals specifically with a system of protected areas. It defines what a system of protected areas is. It includes core wilderness areas surrounded by buffer zones, similar to those used in the biosphere reserves, created under a UNESCO program and promoted by the United States Man in the Biosphere program. There are 382 biosphere reserves around the world, 47 of which are in the United States, not under authority of any treaty, but by voluntary agreement with the United Nations. These biosphere reserves are to be the nucleus for the core wilderness areas. Scratching my head here, what on earth is going on?
Joining me now is radio host Ben Ferguson. Hey, Ben, President Reagan, 50 years ago, he started talking about this, and look what we got now. We have a White House Rural Council. Are you nervous about this?
Sure, and anybody that's in rural America should be worried about this, because what they're saying is we're going to look at what you're doing in your life, and if we seem that you're not somehow using your land to the advantage of the overall American people, then we may have some quote-unquote maybe strong suggestions for you. I mean, look at the people in Minot, North Dakota, for example, this week, who are having to deal with the government, and guess what? They didn't do it right with the levees there, so even when there's a place with a lot of people, they say, hey, why would I want the government telling me what to do with my farmland? Because that area there is massively involved with farm. What, are they going to walk in with with the defense secretary and start telling them where they should farm, how they should farm, and what they should do with their land? I mean, this to me scares me.
And then I stumbled on page 993, and friends, if you don't think that's some heavy reading at night, page 993, after describing these protected areas, sums it all up by saying, the recently published Wildlands Project in the United States is the central theme of protected areas. And on page 15 of the Wildlands Project, Dr. Reed Noss says that we must convert at least 50% of the land area of North America to wilderness, off limits to human beings.
Go ahead, Chris Plant, you're up.
Well, who knows how it's going to turn out, but it's good. It's real good. This is another demonstration of this administration's obsessive-compulsive government disorder. They've decided that government needs to seep in, and it's not just, you shouldn't just be worried if you're in the heartland. We should all be worried about this. This is government out of control. This is crazy. This is over the top. This is one of hundreds of sort of organizations and commissions and panels that this administration has created to wheedle their way into our lives and what kind of light bulbs we can use and how much broccoli we can eat and what we can drive and what our kids have to eat at school. And they're just seeking to control
Tony,
every area of our lives.
Certainly feels like overreach to me.
Not only overreach, Eric, I mean, it's so frightening. This is 16% of America, what's considered rural America, who basically is now going to have its entire livelihood run by government in Washington. Right. They're far away from Washington. They like it that way, is my guess. I think Mr. Ferguson certainly sounds like he's representing that point of view.
Those core wilderness areas are to be interconnected by wilderness corridors off limits to human beings. Those wilderness areas are to be surrounded by buffer zones that may have limited resource use under the supervision and permitting of the federal government, in collaboration with non-government organizations. Human population is to be resettled into the remaining 25% of the land, into communities that are described as sustainable communities.
As more and more many among you had learned since the announcement I delivered in an international webcast on July 25th, 2007, we have been not in a recession, not in a mere depression, but in a general global breakdown crisis of the economy of the entire planet. As long as the present structure of economy in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere continues, the world is going more and more deeply into a general breakdown crisis, which would probably result in the elimination, within a generation or two, of 2/3 of the present level of the world's population. A reduction of the population of the planet from 6.5 to 6.7 billion people today to less than 2 billion in a short period of time. Entire cultures and entire languages and entire nations would disappear.
Now let me put a parenthesis right here for a moment. He created what he called a White House task force on ecosystem management. He called 20 federal departments together and said, you will create an ecosystem management policy, and you will implement the ecosystem management policy throughout the federal government, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, throughout the federal government. They developed what they called multimedia enforcement. Where they run into a problem with a community that will not accept this ecosystem management concept, multimedia enforcement means that all 20 federal agencies descend on the community and begin inspections and writing tickets. I couldn't believe it.
You have the rewilding of America in the Wildlands Project, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is to control our rural population.
Toll roads on interstate highways nationwide are walling off exit ramps to small towns and rural communities, and are creating ghost towns by design.
And Mikhail Gorbachev and Stephen Rockefeller and Marie Strong have written a new 10 commandments for the world. It's called the Earth Charter. You can get it off the internet, or you can contact us. We'll be glad to get you a free copy of it. And they're, of course, talking about how they're going to redistribute the wealth, not only within nations, but between nations. Equitable distribution of wealth within nations, between nations. Equitable distribution of wealth within nations, that's communism. And between nations, well, of course, that's the master plan. That's why we're shipping our jobs overseas. That's why we're shipping our factories overseas. That's why they're running up the price of your oil and gas and electricity. It's to impoverish the American people, to raise your living standards to that of the Bolivian peasant. We want equality for everybody but the ruling elite. And that, of course, is exactly what Plato wrote about.
This trend is accelerating under the NAFTA highway system and is meant to rewild more than half the country.
All of these things are designed to bring more and more control to bureaucracies rather than to the independent individual, the sovereign individual of this nation. What brought me into this whole discussion was the fact that while I was doing this multi-million-dollar research effort in the 1980s and early 1990s, I became aware of an agenda basically to lock up one half of the United States into wilderness corridors and reserves. What's called the Wildlands Project, but it was also a key cornerstone of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. It was during that study in which I began to realize that this was not an effort to protect the environment, but an effort to control you and I. They were dividing the United States up into little compartments in which they would rip out roads, which they would rip out whole communities and put them back in the wilderness.
You are under attack. Just by the mere fact that you exist, you are an obstacle to the overall agenda of the world's superior dictatorship. Please stop allowing yourselves to be distracted and realize that this is real. This is happening right now. If you find yourself investigating these coincidental phenomenons, there is a reason. Our very livelihood is about to be hijacked and controlled. The Agenda 21 is a public-private partnership, which means corporations will soon be seizing government assets. This means the very corporations that have had you enslaved to their will, their water supply, and their medicines will now be in control of the world's entire infrastructure. If you are scared, you should be.
I want to tell you about a few of the things that I have learned during these last 5 years of intensive research. Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published.
It's a 40-chapter document to basically control the world. It's based entirely on socialist control mechanism.
The document calls for literally reducing the human population by as much as 2/3 to 3/4 in the next 30 to 50 years. It could set aside up to 1/2 of the American landscape into wilderness areas interconnected by wilderness corridors, all surrounded by human buffer zones in which Human activities are highly regulated. That is very, very clear in these United Nations documents that they want to set up a regulatory structure that would affect every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. And all of the control would be headquartered in the United Nations.
We are called populist trash, activists who can destroy, they say, in a moment, years of deliberation. And you're darn right. And I have been challenged on the radio and in audiences like this. Mr. Lamb, there's no such thing as a global agenda. Hey, friend, you're absolutely wrong. Here it is. It's called Agenda 21. Agenda 21. The primary document presented in Rio de Janeiro and adopted by more than 100 heads of state, including George Bush, which lays out in intricate detail all of the transformation that must take place in society in order for it to become sustainable as they define sustainability.
Sustainable development has become the popularized expression for Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is the 1992 United Nations Rio Declaration on the Environment and Development.
It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today. For a brave new world where everything that you cherished and held true will no longer exist.
Scratching my head here, what on earth is going on? Human population is to be resettled into the remaining 25% of the land, into communities that are described as sustainable communities.
I went to these committees at the request of some people who told me that I needed to understand what was going on, and I came back and I said, this is craziness. This is so silly. It has no chance of having any effect on our society. Well, I was wrong. The United States government's support for sustainable development, Agenda 21, is very clear. In 1992, while the Rio Conference was going on, George Bush, then president, was there where he executed the Agenda 21 protocols on behalf of the United States and brought it back to Washington, D.C. Within a year, Bill Clinton, by executive order, no congressional review, established the President's Council for Sustainable Development. This is a map of the Wildlands Project. To explain the map, the red are areas that are to be off limits to human beings. No resource development, no human activity. If you live there, you won't. The yellow areas are the areas for major control of all human activity. If you live there, you won't. The black areas, the black dots, are the smart growth zones. That's where human beings are to be stacked and packed in small living units along rail tracks. The smart growth program ultimately has jobs assigned and children cared for by the state.
The question has been asked many times how the people who are perpetrating these things expect to do this and make it last. And the answer to that is that you steal a generation of children and you indoctrinate them so that they accept these ideas and they become global citizens in the coming global village.
Our children are mathematically illiterate on purpose. How do I know on purpose? Why isn't this just a basic bad idea? Because the Sustainable Development Plan tells us so. Generally, more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. In this case, more education increases the threat to sustainability. I did not believe for the longest time it was a deliberate dumbing down. I thought the dumbing down was a natural consequence of a bad idea. Folks, it's deliberate. It's deliberate.
The sustainable globalist goal is the orchestration of a planned fall of American principles, values, and lifestyles. The effect on the average American will be devastating. with modernizing technology, the ordinary person will live without independence, privacy, or substantive rights.
Another press conference that I attended was the ICLE group, the International Committee for Local Environmental Initiatives, that helps in the implementation of Agenda 21 in all of our local communities. And one of the speakers was a Harvey Reuven, who happens to be the vice chair of ICLE. And I asked him about the correlative rights that Americans derive from the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And that, of course, is your individual liberties, your private property, your freedom of speech. I asked about it clashing with Agenda 21, and you know what his response was? Individual rights must take a back seat to the collective.
He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths.
66% of United States residents' public water is fluoridated. It is known to have tremendous effects on bone cancer, joint problems, bone weakness, lowered estrogen and testosterone levels, and dental fluorosis, which is yellowing of the teeth and pitting in the enamel. Wouldn't it make more sense to enhance public water with vitamins which are meant to be ingested to promote overall health, rather than putting such a toxic chemical in our water with a bogus explanation that it will improve our dental health? We now know that fluoride causes more dental problems than it solves. Something doesn't seem right about this. Do you honestly believe that these companies care deeply enough for the people to spend large amounts of their own money to fluoridate public water when the people already purchase their own toothpaste? But there's a difference between toothpaste and drinking water. We don't ingest toothpaste. If you go to any hardware store and look at any rat poison product, you will only find one ingredient: sodium fluoride. Aspartame, the artificial sweetener found in almost every low-sugar or sugar-free product on the market.
First of all, aspartame is made up of three things: methanol, which of course is what produces blindness, aspartic acid, and phenylalanine. These are all poisons. Aspartic acid, of course, produces brain lesions. This was known back in the early 1970s. Methanol produces blindness. Phenylalanine is what you see in the brain, and in high dosage it produces trauma.
Many of the planes that we're seeing here in Abilene will actually turn whatever they're spraying on and off right before our eyes. I mean, you'll see a plane up there flying like normal, and then all of a sudden it starts spraying. We've seen them fly off into the distance and then loop around and fly back again. These are not your typical planes with a preordained path destination from city to city. Someone needs to explain to me why do they stop traveling in one particular direction and then loop around and come back again. They perform this behavior so many times that we start seeing the tic-tac-toe grids in the sky. We're witnessing the giant X's. And I mean, Rosalind, when you and I grew up, these contrails naturally dissipated in a few seconds or perhaps a minute max. But these things expand, they grow bigger, and before you know it, the entire sky is overcast.
That's correct.
It seemed like some mornings it was just crisscrossing the whole sky, and it was just like a giant checkerboard.
Bill Nichols snapped several photos of the strange clouds from his home in Stamps, Arkansas. They begin as normal contrails from a jet engine, but do not fade away like a normal contrail. Soon after, he saw particles in the air.
You know, because we'd see it drop to the ground in a haze.
Nichols then noticed the material collecting on the ground.
This is water and stuff that I collected in bowls. I had it set out in my backyard on my dad's pickup truck.
KSLA News 12 had the sample tested at a lab. The results? A high level of barium, 6.8 parts per million, more than 3 times the toxic level set by the EPA.
President Obama has put in place a reform apparatus reviving the euthanasia of Hitler Germany in 1939 that began the genocide there. The apparatus here is to deny medical care to elderly, chronically ill, and poor people, and thus save, as the president says, $2 to $3 trillion by taking lives considered not worthy to be lived, as the Nazi doctors said.
Start this off by giving a little background on what a cytokine storm is. Now, a cytokine storm is the basic killing element of any highly deadly virus that kills quickly, whether it's the 1918 pandemic, which was a version of swine flu, SARS, or H5N1 bird flu. These all kill using a cytokine storm. And another unique characteristic of a cytokine storm is that it affects mostly people with healthy immune systems. They've been spraying the chemtrails for the last 10 years to reduce your body's ability to fight the cytokine storm effect. Then they boost the cytokine storm effect by putting the adjuvants in the H1N1 vaccine. Then the real killer comes a lot of the cytokine storm effect, and the puzzle's complete: depopulation.
But just how do they nicely bring world population down to about 5% of what it is right now? Achieving depopulation is a sticky problem. There are about 200,000 new babies born into the world every day. Nations do not voluntarily take control of their population growth rates, especially not the Muslim ones, and probably not the Catholic ones either. Let's have a look at another video now about plans to scientifically and very quietly bring down population numbers by bringing down fertility.
Chemicals are routinely added to normal immunizations as a feature of a connivance to decrease the number of inhabitants in the planet. That required immunizations are bound with perilous chemicals intended to influence individuals to debilitate it and eventually eradicate the globe. To comprehend the full broadness of the discoveries, it is first essential to know some key recorded realities. The World Health Organization was set up in 1945 and instantly grasped the fundamental of family arranging, which was later alluded to as arranged parenthood, as a need for world well-being. Around 1972, the initiated the WHO conception prevention antibody included connecting the lockjaw toxoid, TT, with the beta part of the human pregnancy hormone chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. This mix guides the invulnerable framework to deliver antibodies against TT as well as against HCG, causing unnatural birth cycles in officially pregnant beneficiaries and barrenness in those not yet pregnant. The outcomes were reported and celebrated by WHO scientists as the principal hostile to ripeness antibody in 1976 amid a meeting of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Around a similar time, otherwise called the Kissinger Report, wound up plainly official U.S. approach in 1975, calling for lessening the populace developed and less created nations to almost zero by methods for diminishing ripeness. Quick forward to 2010 when Bill Gates, whose father headed up Planned Parenthood after World War II, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation they would confer $10 billion to help achieve the WHO populace decrease objectives to some extent with new antibodies. After 1 month, Gates showed up in his now notorious where he put forth the expression. The world today has 6.8 billion individuals. That is made a beeline for around 9 billion. Presently, in the event that we make a truly incredible showing with regards to our new antibodies, human services, regenerative well-being administrations, we could bring down that by, maybe, 10 or 15%. Quick forward again to 2014 when the Kenya Conference of Bishops, KCCB, issued an official statement that made standard news, claiming that the WHO was subtly utilizing its conception prevention immunization amid its hostile to lockjaw inoculation crusade in Kenya from 2013 to 2015. Was there evidence, past the long history of flawed strategies, proclamations, and activities by the WHO and its lander? The new paper in the Open Access Library Journal by creators from the US, Canada, and Kenya lays out different indisputable pieces of evidence to move down the KCCB's allegations from 2014. The first of many conclusive pieces of evidence ensnaring the WHO in a mass disinfection program was found by faithful well-being experts working in conjunction with free labs. The paper's writers compose 3 autonomous Nairobi-authorized natural chemistry research facilities tried specimens from vials of the WHO lockjaw immunization being utilized as a part of March 2014 and discovered HCG where not ought to be available. In October 2014, 6 extra vials were acquired by Catholic specialists and were tried in 6 licensed research centers. Once more, HCG was found 50-50 the examples. Another conclusive evidence was that the Kenya Ministry of Health and authorities talking in the interest of the WHO were to wipe out maternal and neonatal lockjaw as it were. No guys were immunized inside the WHO's battle, and the objective was just females between the ages of 12 to 49 years. However, there is no justifiable motivation to endeavor to avert lockjaw just in females of childbearing age, since guys and more established females can likewise create lockjaw from defiled cut injuries. Besides, maternal and neonatal lockjaw following labor can be avoided by sterile obstetric practices. At that point the paper's creators' narrative the third conclusive evidence, strikingly, the dosing plan for the lockjaw battle in Kenya 2013 to 2015 was precisely the one set for the WHO conception prevention conjugate containing TT/beta HCG. A run-of-the-mill immunization plan for neonatal lockjaw version would have been extraordinary. Informants related with the Catholic Church and expert life bunches have raised numerous doubts since in any event the mid-1990s that the WHO was leading hostile to fruitfulness crusades under the pretense of their overall undertakings to take out maternal and neonatal lockjaw. On the off chance that all these past doubts are additionally valid, has the WHO been submitting a similar misrepresentation in many circumstances over? Has the WHO been deliberately deceptive ladies informing nations into supposing they are shielding them and their future kids from lockjaw while in truth denying ladies of their richness and the very youngsters they needed to ensure? What's more, what will prevent them from doing as such later on?
Nations do not voluntarily take control of their population control rates, especially not the Muslim ones, and probably not the Catholic ones either. There's a certain amount of natural attrition that comes about through war, but it isn't enough to stave off the necessity for more emphatic population control. While medicine and technology can extend life, especially in Western nations, less is being done to stop wars in other nations, as these wars actually help keep those global population growth curves down. Unfortunately, India, Pakistan, and China are the primary targets for population decrease, as these populations are in exponential growth, and between them account for 1/3 of the world's population. Add in the rest of the Far East, and 50% of the world's population is represented. One can certainly see an elitist interest in sparking a war here and letting it run out of control. Or, on the other hand, just wait for 50 years, and drought and hunger will kill them as well. There's always the option then of weather warfare, using ways of bringing drought on these countries, which will, for a start, kill those that are there and also stop them bearing more children. It's quite a terrifying and slow death, however. Now, food shortages will become a more important issue in each decade as populations continue to grow, while weather disasters and other natural disasters also increase. These weather disasters include widespread droughts. Disasters often bring plague and disease with them, and these can be made to grow into regional pandemics, like the cholera in Yemen. This is another opportunity for the elite to sanction the sowing of disease in languishing nations, and further press down population numbers. Man-made, especially military, viral plagues are also available and could be piggybacked on natural disasters by globalists seeking to reduce populations. Current chemtrail spraying is serving to weaken people, pre-taxing their immune systems before spraying them with a strong engineered bird virus or anthrax virus. Morgellons disease has already been reported in connection with chemtrailing in the United States. Let's have a look at a video that talks a bit about the massive amount of chemtrailing that's going on in several states in America. And I should point out that when Trump came to power, he did actually pass an executive order to stop chemtrailing, but it's not really clear what date that's meant to take effect, because even a year after he came to power, chemtrailing was still seen to be going on. Let's have a look at that video.
Last night I was talking about the geoengineering that's been going on for years, as they pretend they're only now discussing the possibilities of doing it, which is utter nonsense. They've been doing it for many, many years. They know the side effects, and that's really what they're discussing, is how to mitigate them or keep them from the public. And it's quite easy to keep anything from the public because we're not too bright. But the book that I was using yesterday was Policy Implications of Greenhouse Warming, Mitigation, Adaptation and the Science Base, published in 1992. The Bible, you might say, for the agenda. And I put the link up last night where you can go into the site yourself and government sites and download this particular book. But on page 433, it's got this to say. Remember, this is 1992. Geoengineering. In this chapter, a number of geoengineering options are considered. Then they go through the different options and the hoopla to do with how it might or might not work. But they say here, other geoengineering possibilities include reforesting the United States. I guess if let people get off the land, you see, you can reforest it. That's why you want the habitat areas for Agenda 21. To increase the storage of carbon in vegetation, simulating an increase in oceanic biomass as a means of increasing the storage and natural sequestering of carbon in the ocean, and so on. Yada, yada, yada. This is important to recognize. Now, listen to this. Listen to this part here. 1992. For those who are still in their religious phase, who use words like, do you believe this, or do you believe that? Do you believe in global warming? Do you believe in Y2K? That's a religious thing, you see. This is 1992. It says here, it is important to recognize that we are at present means in the now, for the harder thinking. We are at present involved in a large project of inadvertent geoengineering by altering atmospheric chemistry. and it does not seem inappropriate to inquire if there are countermeasures that might be implemented to address the adverse impacts. You understand what that just said now? Come on, we're back in junior school here, eh? Let's do it again, children. It says, it is important to recognize that we are at present involved in a large project of inadvertent geoengineering by altering atmospheric chemistry. And it does not seem inappropriate to inquire if there are countermeasures that might be implemented to address the adverse impacts. So they knew then that there already were adverse impacts, since they're talking about countermeasures that might be implemented to address them, to alter them. And people who can still think clearly, to an extent at least, and plough through their gobbledygook and their different phrases they use to make it sound very scientific, will get a lot out of it. Most folk won't, because most folk really want to go into conspiracy sites, you know, and whereas it's kind of exciting. These aren't exciting things to read. Nothing that really happens or is of import is very exciting. It's very boring, dull and dry, but it's the most important information you'll ever find in your life is when you go through this kind of stuff. So they admit then they were already engaged in this project, this geoengineering project, a large project, they said, and it's been going on for an awful long time. Britain, by the way, has just been warned it's in for another week of freezing sleet and snow and blizzards in April. But that doesn't matter. We're apparently going to fry to death to see if they don't save us and all that rubbish. Remember, there's different reasons behind all of this. What's interesting too in this policy implications of greenhouse warming mitigation adaptation and the science base, it starts off with humans are the problem, right out of the Club of Rome, because they're the guys that dreamt that one up and they're proud to admit it in their own book. So humans, it's all to get us to depopulate. Mind you, this stuff too, it does mention in the writings in the book that the side effects, some of the side effects will be sterilization of the general public and increased death rate, which is to their advantage, it says. To their advantage. Yep. Yeah, that's what it's about, folks. No conspiracy site there. You can go into the government one and find it at their own website. In 1998, in Canada, in Ontario here, they started spraying the skies in a serious manner. And I remember the day when it started, because I walked outside and I couldn't believe, I thought it was in some kind of movie shot, that it really was a checkerboard pattern, really tight together, like a fishing net above you, a white fishing net. It was that precise. And they were at least at half the height spraying it than they are today. I couldn't believe that folk didn't look up and see it. And from then on, it's been, of course, a roller coaster of spraying and spraying and spraying. And we all have read the different articles about, they're thinking about spraying the atmosphere to stop global warming, etc. But in reality, they've been doing something with it since at least 1998 on a serious, continuous basis. And they were doing it for long before that, for years, testing it on and off. And I've read the articles where they test things on and off over different countries. But this is for serious. And it says, and of course too, I've talked about the aluminum oxide and the barium, which has been found in it. And I've gone into the writings of Teller, who was the inventor of the H-bomb, who worked for the Pentagon and who came up with the idea of flooding the air with metallic particles and using what's now called HARP technology, and electromagnetic pulsing across the atmosphere. The very thing that Brzezinski talked about in Between Two Ages, where he said that the techniques of weather control manipulation would come into being. But he also touched on, too, how certain things could affect the minds of people, make them tranquil or aggressive depending on the frequency, because this stuff literally makes the atmosphere itself like a chemical conductor, much more agreeable to electrical variations and transmission. So this article here is from Science. It says, levitating nanoparticles may make for better geoengineering. So it's bad enough when they're already dosing you with stuff, and it's definitely affecting people's lungs and sinuses, etc., ongoing infections since 98. So now they want to go into the nanoparticles, if they haven't already, you see. Now, nanoparticles of, say, barium and aluminum oxide and stuff, this stuff literally, apart from making you rather senile, is highly carcinogenic as well. But it doesn't matter, that would all tie in with the big plan, wouldn't it? Especially over areas where they want to bring down the populations. And if you don't have the right kind of chelation therapies, etc., which I'm sure the bigwigs get, then this stuff's going to stay in your system. A recent analysis of geoengineering options indicated that while pumping chemicals into the upper atmosphere would work, well, they know it would work because they've been doing it, the approach comes with significant risks. Since the chemicals would gradually come back out of the atmosphere, these schemes would require constant input to remain effective. That's why they do it every day. A paper released in PNAS this week suggests there might be a lower effort alternative, nanoparticles that are structured in a way that helps them control their altitude. Even if CO2 emissions, oh, here we go, are eventually reduced, it's got nothing to do with it. We may have put enough in the atmosphere by then to ensure that some form of geoengineering may be needed to lower the global. If they lower the global temperature anymore, I'll be sitting on an ice floe. I think, just mass. It was 20 below zero Fahrenheit last night here, which is a bit chilly. Aerosols in the upper atmosphere increase the Earth's albedo, the overall reflected of the planet, reducing global temperatures by reflecting more sunlight back into space. Chemical aerosols are popular geoengineering candidates, but they have their own problems. For example, sulfates in the lower stratosphere can accelerate removal of ozone, and we'd have to constantly pump more into the upper atmosphere. That's a great business for somebody. And believe you me, big chemical companies are obviously involved in this, making an awful lot of money. The main advantage of the proposed nanostructures over chemical aerosols is their ability to control their altitude. So the proposed nanostructures do this by taking advantage of what are called photophoretic forces. These forces arise from a temperature difference between the nanostructure and the surrounding atmosphere. If a cold gas particle strikes a warmer nanostructure, then the gas particle will recoil off with more energy. At least that's a PR for the salesman. That results in a force on the particle. The amount of energy transferred in this process is a property of the material and a function of the temperature, and is described by something called the accommodation coefficient. Sounds very impressive, eh? By constructing nanostructures with different values, one can change the net force on the nanostructure. So, what are they going to use for it, eh? Well, goodness me, they're back to aluminum again. It says aluminum and barium again, titanate. The aluminum layer reflects sunlight but is transparent to thermal infrared. The barium trinitrate layer has a higher density than the aluminum layer and interacts with the atmospheric electric field to orient the disk with the reflective side up. The difference in between aluminum and barium trinitrate also produces a net photophoretic force, levitating the disk with a force up to 3 times its weight, to say. Well, breathing all this stuff in, that'll go right into your bloodstream.
Now, could chemtrailing simply be an attempt to seed rain? Well, probably not, as chemtrailing does not seem to be producing noticeable downpours in connection with the chemtrailing itself. It's true instead that the US appears to be in the beginnings of a mega drought. America's major lakes are slowly drying up. And this is not just in local regions, it seems to be right across the continent. NASA's climate research data confirms that America has been in long droughts before. Now, within the chemtrails themselves, barium and aluminium particles in the chemtrails suggest that perhaps reflection of sunlight, that is an attempt to cool the air, might be the primary objective of the spray. The presence of radioactive strontium is more troubling, however. Other elements found in chemtrails include sulfur, iron, lead, manganese, magnesium, aluminum, barium, arsenic, trimethyl aluminate, sulfur hexachloride. This last element, interestingly, actually promoting global warming. It causes heating of the atmosphere. Now, canisters containing this compound have reportedly been delivered on shuttles to space and detonated there. So this would suggest that, in fact, there's a plan to push forward global warming and its effects to sell the narrative through the media more effectively. Now, the official name of the spraying program in America is called Indigo Skyfold. And chemical trailing is occurring in London as well, and I'm told it's also taking place in parts of New Zealand. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but a claim I've heard. Let's have a look at a couple of slides just from the before and after shot of a inland lake in America to show you the difference before and after. So one is 2011, the other is 2014. Only in 3 years you have that great difference in the water levels. And according to NASA, there's a 100 years long drought coming, because they reckon in American geological history, the droughts do tend to, evidence suggests they tend to last for up to 100 years. But the forecast of a long water shortage is as good a reason as any to limit one's population or to go to war. People don't have to be fighting over territory anymore or manufacturing industries, but just over water, just the water to survive. This is a sticky problem for the New World Order, which probably hadn't banked on a global drought setting in just as their plans were coming to fruition. On the other hand, it only strengthens their resolve to implement Agenda 21 and to get world population even more quickly under control. The script speaks of reduction to 1 billion or less, and maintaining that population going forward. Perhaps of some interest then on this issue are observations on at least 3 occasions in 2017 alone of apparent weather manipulation coming from Antarctica, with satellite captures of bursts of pressure waves radiating from near the Princess Elizabeth Station in Antarctica, and focusing on a point in the ionosphere off the North American west coast, evidently some sort of weather manipulating or earthquake inducing weapon. There is also a huge barge that the Americans tow from place to place around the world that acts as a focusing device for such waves.
Hey, what's up guys? Tyler here with Secure Team. Some weird, strange stuff going on around the world. And if you remember in a past couple of videos, we've been talking lately about these strange, I guess you could call them energy waves, that were captured by a couple of satellites orbiting the Earth that basically map out the radiation or microwaves that are encircling our planet. And in some cases, it helps them detect storms and hurricanes and stuff like that. And so over the past week or so, people started noticing on this mimic map some very strange, out of place, and dare I say it, artificial looking patterns that by all accounts on most of them appear to be coming from somewhere down near Antarctica. All right, and I'm showing you the maps of those here. You can see the rest of the map. It has these, abstract, multicolored blobs of energy, okay? That's naturally what it looks like. What it doesn't look like are these strange spirals, these spiral patterns and triangular, cone-shaped patterns that we've been seeing over the past week. And what I want to talk about today is a possible link directly with Antarctica, because up until now, nobody really knows what's causing these waves. Nobody really knows whether they're actually coming from Antarctica. And over the past week, there have been some strange world events specifically happening around Brazil. But not only that, I want to show you guys a recent discovery that was found just off the coast of Antarctica of something very strange, we'll just say. And it may directly link to these strange waves that we're seeing here. So here we are, we're on Google Earth. And we're right over the spot where this discovery was made, just off the coast of Antarctica, and I'll put the coords down below. But it's basically right off the coast of something called, and I'm not making this up, Rothschild. It's a peninsula, right off the peninsula, and it's literally called Rothschild. And that name may sound familiar to you. It's probably one of the most well-known names in conspiracy circles today, because that is the last name of the famous, ultra-rich, elite family known as the Rothschilds. And, this family has been linked to the Illuminati, the New World Order, the attempted controlling of the world and governments, and, that we won't go down that rabbit hole today, but, study up on them. So I thought it was kind of funny that this little area of Antarctica where we've discovered this is called Rothschild. So a viewer of mine was looking around Antarctica right off the coast here, and he discovered what appears to him as a very mysterious grid, I guess you could call it, of sorts. And I'm zooming in here. If you don't see it yet, I'll go ahead and circle it. And this thing is almost in a perfect square. I mean, it is a perfect square. And it's of something. It's a grid of something, a bunch of objects down at the bottom of the ocean. And so here we are, we're zoomed in closer, and you can obviously see the pattern here. You can see how these strange, what look like dots when you're zoomed out, line up perfectly. They crisscross up and down, forming a almost complete square. And you won't find these anywhere else around this area. The way these Google Maps work is that they have both ships and satellites that, through using a number of methods from sonar, radar, and a bunch of other ways that they basically map the topography of the bottom of the ocean, they have been able to give us some very high resolution and detailed views of what the bottom of our oceans look like all around the world. And so when I saw this, it immediately stuck out as artificial, obviously. And it reminded me of those crisscrossing square HARP grids. HARP is the antenna arrays that many people believe are used, it's public. They use them to manipulate the weather. And they supposedly shut them down a couple of years ago. However, there's proof that they are back up and running elsewhere. And so as we zoom in here, I want you guys to notice, and at first you may think that these actually look like little holes, but they're not. These are actually little raised bumps, whatever they are, because we don't have a super high-res version, but every one of these things is elevated off the ground like you would think of a spike or a tower. And they're all relatively the same size, and as you're looking at them, you can tell that they all have slightly different shapes, all right? So this is not just a copy of a copy, some image glitch. And furthermore, you can clearly see other features of the ocean floor running in between these things. All right, and you can see them. They're three-dimensional. You can see the lighting and the shadowing, showing that these things are raised up off the floor and are making this eerily perfect, hidden out in the middle of nowhere, the last place you would think to look, this strange grid of something off the coast of Rothschild. And so the big question is, what is this? What is this grid? What are these objects protruding from the bottom of the seafloor? And why would they be there to begin with? There's nothing in this area. There's no bases. And there's especially nothing that we know about or that would warrant the placement of such a massive grid of objects that are so large, in fact, these things are spanning miles. And so then I thought to myself, okay, we know that these strange energy waves that we talked about earlier in the week seem to be, or at least some of them seem to be coming from down in the general region of Antarctica. So what I did was I zoomed back out, as you're seeing here, and I then precisely placed the mimic map with these strange energy anomalies directly over top of the globe here. So it matches up. South America matches up. And I wanted to see exactly where these strange spiraling energy waves are coming from. And so you're seeing that here, and as it loops over, I want you to pay attention to the area with which these spirals come from. And I will go ahead and circle the exact spot here of this strange grid that we found, and we'll go ahead and freeze frame it here. We see this strange spiral anomaly, and as we take away the map, you can see that this energy wave lines up eerily perfect with the location of this strange underwater grid. The Rothschild grid, as I'm now calling it. And so obviously, by looking at this map, the wave is so large, and the way they map it out is that you can't exactly pinpoint where it came from, but it's going right over this little area of Antarctica where this grid is. And what we've noticed also is that most of these energy waves have been going partially over or completely engulfing the country of Brazil in South America. And wouldn't you know it, over the past week or so, Brazil South America as a whole has been experiencing some very strange weather, along with some things happening with their ocean. There's a recent report out where residents were completely stunned when they came out to see that the shore in the ocean water that was once sitting there with their boats floating on top of it had completely disappeared. All right, receded. Water receded back, disappeared, leaving boats and anything that was originally floating there sitting on the dry sand. And there's a ton of Twitter posts about this. This affected both parts of Brazil and Uruguay. And it happened on August 11th and 12th, where suddenly, out of nowhere, the ocean receded in some parts nearly 20 meters, or between 30 and 50 feet, in a span of about 15 minutes. And again, it left yachts, fishing boats, and sea lions even stranded. And you know, we're not talking about the type of receding that happens twice a day at the oceans, depending on where the moon is. We're not talking about that. This was something completely different that the villagers and the people had never seen before. And it was so scary to them that they actually thought that there was a tsunami coming and literally started leaving the area, running for cover. Because obviously, if all of this ocean water disappears within the span of 15 minutes, it's got to be going somewhere else. And so meteorologists were stumped and kind of came out and said, well, it may have been caused by strong winds coming from the north. But no one's buying that. And as you're looking at the pictures here, you can see the devastation that this left. It's happened before in places like India and stuff like that, but never seen like this, where the ocean just drains itself out. So, you know, some people believe this has to do with these strange energy waves moving over Brazil and Uruguay. And this isn't the only strange activity we had. We also have footage like this that has recently come out in the past few days, where once again, in Brazil, two men who must have balls of steel, because they stood here and recorded what amounts to a super massively tall land spout, or land tornado, that appeared out of nowhere, and throughout the footage, you'll notice seems to just stand in the exact same spot. And if you know anything about tornadoes and stuff like that, these things move around. But this thing didn't do that. And, you know, completely crazy. Can't believe these guys aren't taking shelter. But here we have more strange and just crazy, outrageous weather happening in Brazil. And, you know, it's kind of really reaffirming that maybe these mysterious waves we're seeing do have something to do with weather manipulation, you know? And yeah, you know, a lot of things going on. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm just showing you guys what we know so far. I'm not definitively saying this is what is happening or this is what is not happening, you know, but I'm putting it out there just like every other channel, trying to figure it out.
Technology to alter weather is available, as well as the technology to create earthquakes. Benjamin Fulford was threatened to gain his silence when doing an expose of Illuminati operations in Japan, and the threat was delivered at a specified time in the form of an earthquake in a Japanese city that came close to damaging a local nuclear reactor. In April 2018, a similar earthquake near a nuclear reactor, ordered by Trump, served as a warning to the Iranians, who were threatening to fire a nuclear missile at Israel. So this technology is certainly at hand now. Anyway, back to the issue of water shortages. I think that water can be produced at will if necessary, cost aside, and right now we are already seeing the Illuminati securing all known water reserves around the world, as well as patents for technology that controls water technology and water production, so that they can profit from the upcoming water deprivation. It seems that they think it's okay to leave the rest of us to battle it out during the coming droughts. They think it's okay to corner the market on one of the world's natural resources, namely water. There seems to be something wrong with the system that it allows people to do that. Sustained drought, of course, is a nice natural way to achieve some of the population nutrition they're looking for. And of course, if people die of thirst and hunger and failed crops, nobody can be blamed. It's an act of God. And that's why these are the kinds of approaches they prefer to follow. Puts them above the reach of anybody's laws. Well, that's it for today. We're going to pick it up again next week in Agenda 21 Part 3. we're getting close to going back to the scriptures. I said we were going to go back to it before we started these 3 on Agenda 21. But we're about to go back into the topics of the 144,000 and the 2 witnesses in Revelation 11 after this. So we'll just tie it up next week with the rest of Agenda 21, bringing us up to date with what's going on in the world of politics and secret societies and the insidious schemes of those who actually want to get rid of 9/10 of the human beings on the earth. And I hope I'm making you well aware of what they're all planning. So next week we're going to look at some things like their plan for the vaccines and all the other things, the control of food and water, and how that's going to keep you not as well as you would like to think. And also the plan they've had there for a long time, if necessary, to launch a fake alien attack against the people. And the use of FEMA camps, not just for those who are civilly disobedient, but for the masses of the people who reject their transition in the land, in the continent of America, toward a New World Order takeover. So anyway, before we do all that, let me just wish you a good night tonight, and I hope you got something out of tonight's videos and everything. And we do hope to see you again next week. I know it's more about the world than about the Bible right now, but we are going to come back to the scriptural description soon and see if we can piece it all together. So until then, have a great week. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.